all right. Welcome back. Welcome back. We're going to continue the conversation. Well, it's not really a conversation because it's just me talking at you, but welcome back to the next segment here. And we are going to talk about Texas parents. What's going on in Texas? Now, I've been back in Texas for about a month or so, and there's a lot going on here in the Lone Star State in my state here. And I'm liking it. I'm liking it, at least most of it. We have a legislative session coming up next year, and it's going to be pretty big. And school choice is going to be one of the major issues, if not the major primary hot button issue. And I'm going to talk more about Texas and school choice as time goes on because that's been a cause that's been going on in the Lone Star State for a lot of years, but they haven't been able to pass school choice legislation. But I think next year is a year when it's going to happen. But this is an interesting story. Not too surprising unless you haven't been keeping up what's been going on with the education debate and what's been going on in public K through 12 schools. But Texas parents have decided that they are fed up with the public school system and they are pulling their kids in droves. Now, this is something that's actually happening all across the country. But being that Texas is the second highest in population in the country, this is a very significant development. Now, there was a recent Fox News report um, reporting that Texans are not too keen on public schools anymore. And in this report, they were telling Fox News why they weren't bringing their kids back after the whole COVID lockdowns and all that stuff. So prepare to not be shocked. So basically, parents told Fox News that one of the primary reasons why they're pulling their children out of public schools is the over-the-top politicization and bias taking place in the classroom, which is very interesting because, you know, Randy Weingarten, she's the head of one of the biggest teachers unions in the country. She's very much involved in the education debate, and she's very much involved in pushing, this critical race theory and problematic teachings on sexuality and gender identity in the classroom. She's one of the biggest defenders of that. And she always talks about how parents who are concerned about this stuff are the ones who are politicizing the issue. Now, there's an old saying in politics, and I believe it's the quote is attributed to Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda minister, and he said, essentially, always accuse your enemy of that which you are doing. So when Weingarten and her ilk are peddling that lie that it's parents who are politicizing this issue, they are accusing them of that which they are actually doing. They're the ones who are trying to push these far leftist political ideas to K through 12 children on race, on gender, on sexuality. Parents are pushing back, understandably so, especially since the progressive crowd wants this stuff taking place without parents knowing and without parents being involved. They've been trying to cut parents out of the process, and they've actually been doing this for decades, guys. I know we just found out about this a few years ago when the COVID-19 was going on. Yeah, it had already been happening. And now people are being made aware of it, which is a good thing, but now we're playing catch up. But here's what one of the parents said, one of the Texan parents. Her name was Tara Carter. She told Fox News, quote, "I definitely chose homeschooling for my children because I feel like I'm able to control what they learn, control the speed at which they learn, so they learn at a much faster rate, and control outside influences as far as peer pressure, bullying, and political agendas. I think that's a lot of people's reasons for homeschooling," she said. Now, there was a report also basically saying that the number of Texas students who have been pulled from public schools in favor of homeschooling increased by 40% in spring of last year compared to 2020. So in 2021, homeschooling rates increased by 40% in Texas. This is according to the Texas Education Agency. Now, a lot of these folks shifted to homeschooling because of the COVID-19 pandemic, And a lot of them realize, hey, that this isn't as hard as I thought it would be. There's a lot of misinformation about homeschooling that people don't know about. There's a lot of myths. I've learned a lot over the past couple years. But it's not just that. It's the fact that these parents aren't happy about what's being infused into the curriculum in these classrooms. And parents want control over who they learn from and what they're learning. They want to be able to decide where and how their children are educated. Imagine that. Crazy, right? So Tara Carter also said that she was concerned about the gender identity issue in particular, because that's been a hot button issue. And by the way, when the whole debate over critical race theory was happening last year, when I understood how deep the gender stuff goes, I even predicted in one of my articles that this was going to eclipse critical race theory because it's so egregious. When you mess with people's kids like this, especially when it concerns their identity, their gender identity, and you're trying to cut parents out, yeah, that's going to get a huge backlash. So she said, quote, I don't want them to grow up and worry about gender and things like that. They're still babies to me, and I want them to stay my baby kids as long as they can. She also said, quote, they grow up much faster when they're learning things from their peers that are not appropriate for little kids. But the thing is, they're not just learning it from their peers, right? We've seen the books that are in these libraries. You know, and the left tries to defend this. I mean, you've got borderline pornographic material. You've got that book, Gender Queer, which has graphic comic depictions of a male boy performing oral sex on another male boy. And this is stuff that elementary school kids can get in their libraries in most of these cases. So it's not just their peers, it's the schools themselves. Now the left says, oh, you just want to ban books? No, that ain't gonna work. This is about determining what material is age appropriate, right? So that's what's happening here. But it's even worse because, like I've reported on in the past, I've had many conversations about this. I've talked to Brandon Showalter from the Christian Post. I've talked to many different people about this. It's not just that they're teaching gender ideology and teaching kids that you can switch your gender if you want to. It's the fact that they're also helping kids do this. If a kid expresses that they may be dealing with gender dysphoria, or maybe even not gender dysphoria, but maybe they're just feeling depressed, or maybe there's an issue, they're being actively encouraged to embrace another transgender identity, all behind the backs of their parents. Because a lot of these school districts in Illinois, Massachusetts, LA, all over the country, and not just in blue states, it's happening in red states too. It's happening in Texas. That's why parents are pulling their kids out. They will groom your child if they express certain symptoms or certain feelings, and they don't have to tell the parents unless the kid consents. They are violating parental rights, which is why Florida passed their legislation, which the Parental Rights in Education Act, and recently Virginia passed similar measures to protect parents, their right to raise their child as they see fit. Now, the things that Carter was saying is in line with most Americans. There was a poll put out by the New York Times and Siena, and it found that 70% of American adults do not support the teaching of gender identity to elementary school students. I'm shocked. I mean, there are other polls even showing that even parents who vote Democrat, a majority of them, are not on board with this stuff. They polled them about the Parental Rights in Education Act before it actually became law. And when they actually showed them the text of what the law says, that teachers will not be allowed to instruct kids younger than 7 years old on gender identity, most people were on board with that. Why wouldn't they be? But this is a whole, and I'm going to go more in depth on this in another episode. I've already got it on my list. But this whole gender ideology thing runs deep, guys. It's mainly happening in schools, but not just in schools. There are hospitals that are encouraging this stuff as well. I may have mentioned this in a previous episode, but a few weeks ago at a Wisconsin Pride Parade, they had a booth that was giving out letters from, supposedly from therapists, to give to kids minor children, basically telling them that they are okay to get medical transition or medical gender affirming care in quotations, medical and or surgical. And I'm just gonna do a whole episode on this one day, just explain what this all is. But gender affirming care is essentially these people affirming the idea that these kids were born in the wrong bodies and that they're not actually the sex that they were born as. But in order to get puberty blockers, which is medical gender affirming care in quotations, you have to have a letter from a therapist saying that you're basically clear to do this. So at this pride parade, they were handing these letters out willy-nilly like candy without going through any sort of therapy, without going through any sort of uh, talk therapy or other types of treatment. And that's what's happening nowadays. This isn't the only case. I mean, if you go to a therapist and your kid says, hey, I think I might be a girl, but even though I was born a boy, they're not trying to get to the bottom of it. They're not trying to see if there are other issues at play here. They're not paying attention to whether you have eating disorders or clinical depression or other possible problems. They're saying, oh, okay, well, if you feel like you're transgender, then you are, and we should start getting you on puberty blockers. This is a whole industry, by the way. It makes big money for the people pushing this stuff. And it's disgusting. I mean, the things that I will talk about when I do a whole episode on this will shock you. If you read some of my articles at Red State, or if you read at the Christian Post, if you read some articles by Brandon Showalter, you will be disgusted, because the things that they do to these kids is just, you couldn't have even imagined it 5-10 years ago. But they're still pushing this. The first reason I think is because it's ideological. They don't want to promote the idea that men and women are different, and that men can't become women and women can't become men. They want to blur the lines there as far as people's identities go. But the other part is money. It is. People who perform these surgeries and prescribe these puberty blockers, pharmaceutical companies that manufacture them, they're making big money from getting these things prescribed and used. And especially when it comes to puberty blockers, it's an ongoing thing, right? So you're making money over and over again because they have to keep getting the puberty blockers to suppress their development, which, by the way, causes a lot of long-term consequences. See, in America, we're behind. In the UK and in Sweden, they had already been doing this for 30 years, and they've been monitoring the progress. And now the United Kingdom has shut down its Tavistock facility, which is it's the only gender identity clinic especially for children that they have in the country. And they shut it down because they're pulling away from this stuff because they're saying that it's harmful. Duh. Common sense would have told you that, but again, these people have been educated into imbecility, in the words of journalist Malcolm Muggeridge. In Sweden, they conducted a study over 30 years showing that those who received puberty blockers as children or went through surgical transitions. So in a nutshell, kids who went through gender affirming care were 19 times more likely to commit suicide as adults. But they tell us here in America that this is actually saving their lives. See, a lot of people blame the parents, and I understand that. Obviously they have culpability, right, for letting their kid go through this stuff, right? But here's the thing: what many don't realize is that these parents are being emotionally blackmailed, and they're basically being told, according to statistics, people who identify as transgender have a higher rate of suicides, have a higher rate of mental illness. And if they don't go through these procedures, your child might end up killing themselves. Like in one documentary I watched, the phrase is basically like, if you have a daughter who thinks that she's a boy, then these therapists will straight up tell these parents, you can either have a dead daughter or a live son. It's disgusting. And again, this does. I'm not even touching the tip of the iceberg here. This is just the tip of the iceberg. It goes way deeper than this. I just watched another documentary that just came out called the Detransitioners Diary. It's on Vimeo if you want to watch it. And it details the stories of three girls who went through gender affirming care transitions as teenagers, and then they ended up transitioning back to being female. And they talk about the ways that they were manipulated, the ways that they were lied to. One of them even had what they call top surgery. Now, top surgery is a very nice way of saying double mastectomy. She wanted to become a boy, so she had a double mastectomy. Right. And this is happening all over the place. And you'll see pictures, they will put these on social media showing the scars from one side of the chest to the other because they had their breasts removed because they were told that this would help treat their mental condition. Again, never mind the fact that most of these folks have other issues. Like I said, depression, eating disorders, other disorders, bipolar. So they're using these mental illnesses to manipulate these young women into thinking that they can actually that they're actually a boy in a girl's body, and now you got to start going on puberty blockers and get surgery. So no wonder Texas parents are pulling their kids out of these schools. Again, I told you this isn't just happening in in blue states. It's happening in red states too. Texas, Idaho, Kansas, others. There's a bunch. So I think this trend is going to continue. And I brought up school choice at the beginning of this segment because this is only going to accelerate once the Texas legislature passes meaningful school choice legislation that finally allows parents to decide where and how their kids are educated. When they pass legislation that allows the money to follow the child and not the system, we're going to see more of this. We're going to see more parents putting their kids in private schools. We're going to see more homeschooling. We're going to see more charter schools. And, there are issues with that too because some of these private schools are pushing a lot of this woke ideology, but not all of them are. And you can figure out which ones don't. But this is a trend that's going to continue until, I don't know, until public schools get it together. But they're not going to get it together until they're forced to do it. And I've talked with other people about how to bring that about. And again, that's yet another episode that I have to do. So I've been paying very close attention to this, and I'll be making sure that I let you know what's going on. But this is an important issue, guys. Yeah, the critical race theory stuff is serious, but this gender stuff is also very serious as well. It's part of an overall plan that progressives have to indoctrinate young children. So I'll leave it there for right now, and I will see you on the other side.